Stay tuned. Ahead, I'll talk with Mark Greaney about Sentinel. It's the second book in his new series featuring the character Josh Duffy. Hi, I'm Dan Skinner, and this is Some Books Considered. Mark Greaney is a best-selling author with a degree in international relations and political science. In his research for his novels, he's traveled to more than 35 countries and trained alongside military and law enforcement in the use of firearms, battlefield medicine, and close-range combative tactics. He co-wrote 3 novels with Tom Clancy and was selected to continue writing novels in the Tom Clancy series after Clancy's death. He joins us to talk about Sentinel. Mark, welcome to Some Books Considered.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
This is your second novel to feature the character Josh Duffy in a new series of books. But Josh is a bit different from the normal sort of action hero you see in this genre. So tell us a bit more about him and what sets him apart.
Well, the main difference between Josh and the typical action hero is he's a family man and very much a blue-collar guy just trying to earn a living and support his family. When I first envisioned him, I was doing a lot of training with civilian military contractors, so kind of high-threat bodyguards that would go over to Afghanistan or Iraq or whatever. So I met these guys, and I thought, it's really fascinating because it seems like a real swashbuckling job, but a firearm to them is just a tool of their trade, and these are very blue collar. It's like a plumber or something like that, and they're patriots. They're doing it for the right reasons, but at the same time, it is this blue collar job. So that's the idea of Josh. In this book, Sentinel, he's gotten out of the civilian contracting game, and he works for the State Department. A very nice job, wears a suit and tie to work every day. But he finds himself slipping back into his previous world because of events that happen around him.
Another thing that sets him apart, too, is that he lost part of his leg in the past. So he has to deal with a prosthetic, too, as part of his everyday life, but also kind of comes into play when he's in tough situations.
Yeah, so he's an amputee below the left leg. And, I wanted to show how you would be vulnerable from that, but also it would create, maybe instill some strengths in you as well, to some resolve. And so I want to show him as a guy with a lot of resolve. And when I was doing research on this book, I was talking to diplomatic security agents, and I was like, how realistic is it that someone with a prosthetic could be hired into DS? And the first guy that I asked that question, he's like, oh, I know 2. He's like, I know 2 guys that do that. So I was like, oh, good. I was going to go with it, even if you said it would never happen. But it is a reality. And there's special forces operators who've lost limbs and returned to duty. So it's incredible what the human body can overcome if you have the right mindset.
Is this part of the reason you think readers can kind of identify with him? Because he's not this tougher guy that is unrealistic like you might see in some action novels. But like you said, he has certain vulnerabilities and he has a family. He can't just act unilaterally without thinking about how it impacts his family as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I from the first book, he had a lot of money troubles. It was shortly after his injury at the beginning of the first book, and so he was working in mall security in Virginia, and then he's pulled back into the contracting world for a suicide mission. And so when I was writing the second book, I was like, I can't just go back to that well. And at the beginning of every book, he's like, hey, I need money. I'm going to go throw my life on the line, even though I love my 2 kids and I love my wife. So I said, something needs to change. So I gave him pretty much a stable job with the government. And his wife has a stable job with the government. She's a big factor in these stories, too. She's not just the wife at home wringing her hands while her husband is out there doing the exciting stuff. She's very much involved in the exciting stuff too, whether she wants to be or not.
Well, this is the second book to feature Josh. Is it important to have read the first, or will the second one stand alone?
The second one completely stands alone. I mean, it definitely goes back and says, he was a contractor and, has turned his life around in the past 3 years. And now they live in the suburbs and, they have a couple of used cars and, they're for them, they're doing really, really well. That's all established at the beginning. I want all my books, everything I ever write has to be a standalone because I'm a reader too, and sometimes I'll pick up an unfamiliar book and start reading it and go, "Oh yeah, I have to know everything that's happened previous to this because I've lost my place on page one." So I don't want to do that. So they're all standalone.
But that having been said, it's great to read the first one because you get to know more about the character that way.
Yeah. I always want there to be a longer story arc for people that do read them in order or do read them all. It doesn't hurt reading the second book on its own, but there's a little something extra there for people that do stick with the series.
Well, tell us about the plot of this second book, Sentinel.
Well, so this book, Josh and his wife have been sent to Ghana, which is the most stable nation in West Africa. And they go with their kids, which is how diplomatic security and the Foreign Service operates. They go to Ghana, West Africa, for an assignment at the embassy there, and it's, as I said, it's a stable country in Africa, but it is right in the middle of the African coup belt. So there have been 8 coups in the last 3 years in this region that goes west to east across the northern part of sub-Saharan Africa, and a lot of countries around them have had coups, and they get there, and it seems like a pretty stable posting, but they have to go on a press junket outside of the capital. And unfortunately for them, it's at the exact same time that foreign interests have fomented a coup, which kicks off. So Josh and Nicole are separated from their kids, and they have to protect the ambassador, but they also have to get back to their family right in the middle of a very widespread violent coup.
And China has a role in this novel. I know you like to combine things that are happening in the real world, political situations. So what is going on with China and its influence in other parts of the world that you were able to use to enrich this plot?
China has something that they call the Belt and Road Initiative. It started in 2014, and it's a strategic priority for them. They've invested over $1 trillion so far, and basically what it is all over the developing world, not just Africa, but including Africa, they have done an incredible amount of investment. So they're building ports and roads and rail lines and government buildings in some cases. And in doing this, there is something called debt trap diplomacy. They're loaning these countries the money to build all this for them, but those countries are sort of giving up some sovereignty. And in fact, the African Union built a brand new facility in Ethiopia, and China built it for them and loaned them the money to do it. And then it turned out the Chinese were hacking into all the computers there because they had access to the infrastructure. And so there's definitely a negative side of this. And this book just sort of talks about how all countries have tried to influence themselves or insert themselves into Africa, and the U.S. is no different. I make mention of the fact that the United States tried to kick off a coup in Ghana in the 1980s. So it's like our hands aren't clean in all this either.
I'm talking with Mark Greaney about Sentinel, and our conversation continues in a moment. If you appreciate this discussion, please subscribe, like, and click on the bell so you'll know when I post new interviews. And thank you. Well, this second novel featuring Josh Duffy is Sentinel. Can you tell us about the significance of that title?
Yeah. So in this book, there is the first book was called Armored, and it was basically Josh Duffy working for a private military contracting company called Armored Saint, a really bad one. Well, there's an even worse one in this book, and they're called Sentinel. They're South African based. I think they're sort of chartered out of Fiji or something like that for the legal reasons of having a private military corporation full of Russian ex Wagner, right? Africa Corps guys. And they're not private. They're not civilian military contractors. They're straight up mercenaries, and they've all fought in other wars in Africa and other conflicts. And they're hired by the Chinese to assist a local rebel force. Although these 70, I think there's 70 contractors, they themselves are trained as an army. So they're a very potent force to really make the rebels, who are pretty weak, look a lot more powerful in the eyes of the world.
And I want to talk to you a little bit about this in a moment, about some of the research that you've done for your various novels. But in regard to this particular novel, were there some special research challenges for you?
Well, I knew I wanted to go to West Africa because I never had been. So I went to Ghana, but I made contact with the Diplomatic Security Service, the security people for the State Department, and I got really great access. I spent days in the U.S. Embassy in Ghana, and I got to meet the ambassador and the deputy chief of mission, and of course all the diplomatic security people and the Marines and all that. So well, the challenge was is as soon as you walk in the door of an embassy, you have to hand your phone and your camera over. So I spent a couple of days drinking from the fire hose, getting all this information, and going, I'm just going to have to remember as much of this as possible. So that was a challenge, but it was great to go to Ghana. I got to leave the capital and go up a couple hours away from the capital, where a major scene in the book takes place at a hydroelectric dam. So that's what I did last November, and it was great for the book. But it's always tough to do a lot of intense location research in a short period of time.
And obviously that adds that realism to your novel. And also because there's going to be a reader out there, if you don't get the details right, they'll let you know.
Yeah, there'll be readers anyway. I mean, you can get 99.9% of something right, and somebody will come back. I mean, I get those emails 7 days a week, including about books that I wrote in 2009. They'll be like, "Well, you got this wrong," and it's like, "Yeah, 15 years ago I did. You're not the first person to let me know." But I think people like finding those little mistakes. I try to not make them, but every one of my books, there's something I can pick out and go like, "Yeah, that's not accurate."
Well, many people know you from the Gray Man series, and over the course of those books, you've done an intensive amount of research, on the ground. Tell us a bit about the wide variety of research that went into those books.
Well, for all my books, I've done a lot of research with firearms, scuba diving. I've got to fly in the back of an F-18 fighter jet. I've got to go on a destroyer, been to air bases, most of the three-letter agencies up in the D.C. area, the Pentagon, embassies, as I said. And then it's just a ton of location research. So, I've been in everywhere from China to Russia to Algeria to, I think, 36 or 38 countries, researching these books. Sentinel is my 25th published novel. So there's some research trips I've gone to 4 different countries on one trip. So that's in Europe, where you can get to everything pretty quickly. But I like doing the research for the book. You only have 6 months to write a book usually, so I do as much as I can in the time that I have. But I think it helps the story and helps the writing a lot.
So I think that's a wonderful side effect, I'm sure, that you've enjoyed as part of your careers. You've gotten to see the world and experience a lot of things that otherwise you wouldn't have if you just had a regular job.
Yeah, absolutely. I've sat there and talking to a U.S. senator or a submarine commander or a armored general in the German army, and these experiences, and you sit there and you go, wow, I was a bartender till I was 31. It's really weird that I have this access, but I don't ever take it for granted.
I wouldn't exactly say it's research, but my question here is about Josh Duffy, because he's a family man. He has a wife, he has children, and not long ago, you now have a wife and children. Does that kind of help you inform that character and think about, what he's going through in relation to what you're now experiencing in your life?
I think it does. I got married to a woman with 3 kids, so I have 3 stepkids. I went, in my 50s, I went from having 2 dogs to having a wife, 3 stepkids, and 4 dogs. And my kids are older. My oldest is 20 and my youngest is 14. So the kids in the book are very, very young. So maybe I was channeling more my nephew as my nephew grew up, being around him a lot. But, when I got the idea to write this story different from The Gray Man, I thought, in what ways is this guy different from the Gray Man? Because I don't want to just write the same hero with a different name. And just the idea of, what would it be like to have to go into these really tough situations, knowing that you have a little boy and a little girl at home, and you have a wife that, needs you and wants you back, and all those things. And how would that change the dynamic? So I think it's something that I wanted, in my life. I wanted a family and stuff. So I started writing the book 10 years before that happened. So I do think that I did channel some of that.
What I find interesting, of course, that authors can use instances in their lives to inform their writing. And one of the things I think we even talked about before when I talked to you about a previous book is that being aware of the news and what's happening in the world has been something that's been a part of your life ever since you were a kid. And those dinner table conversations with your father and other family members. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so my dad was a combat veteran in World War II. And fought in Germany, and was actually in the Philippines when the war ended. He was about to fight the Japanese. He was involved in police action there for several months. But he came back home to Memphis in the 1940s and got a job at the local NBC television station. And he rose through the ranks there to become the vice president of general manager of news and public affairs. So he was a great person and fascinated with everything, super curious, big reader, always talking about the news. And so my dad and I would just talk about every news story and all the ins and outs of it. We would share books with each other. We shared Tom Clancy books with each other in the late 80s and 90s. And so he was a big influence on me and being a writer. He did not live to see me get published. He knew that I was writing a book, which was a book that actually never got published. But so he passed away in 2005, and I finished my first book about 2 months after he died, or 3 months. And then my fourth book was The Gray Man. That was my first published novel. So I ended up getting published in 2009.
The fascinating thing to me about that story is that you and your father traded Tom Clancy books. And later, I'm sure he would have been very proud to find out that you co-wrote books with Tom Clancy and are now carrying on that legacy. Yeah,
I guess he'd be proud, but I think more than anything, he'd be flabbergasted. Just knowing my dad, he'd be like, "Where did this come from?" But I discovered Clancy first, about 2 books into his series, and I read everything, and then I started reading all the other authors. And then my dad and I would, at Christmas time, we'd both get each other Clear and Present Danger or Sum of All Fears or whatever, and hand each other these big books. It's a fun thing to think about. Like, what if my dad were around to see that? And, I got to meet Clancy and all that. I think he would have been really fascinated by how that turned out for me.
So what's next for you?
Well, right now I'm writing the 14th Gray Man book. It's called Midnight Black, and it will be out next February. And when that one's done, I think I'm going to have a couple months of downtime, and I'm going to work on Red Metal 2, which I wrote a book in 2009, co-authored a novel with a then active duty Marine Lieutenant Colonel called Red Metal, and it hit the Times list. It did better than I think we expected. And so we're doing a second book in that series. And the next year, I guess I'll get on to Gray Man 15.
The book is Sentinel by Mark Greaney. It's the second book in his new series featuring the character Josh Duffy. Mark, thank you for talking with me today.
Oh, it's always a pleasure. I enjoyed it.
If you'd like to purchase Sentinel, I've placed a link for you in the description below. And if you'd like to see more videos about books and their authors on a wide variety of topics, be sure to subscribe, like, and click on the bell to be notified about future programs. I'm Dan Skinner. Thank you for watching this edition of Some Books Considered.